What's up, guys? It's Chris from the Humorous Mathematicians. I wanted to take a second to tell you about one of our sponsors. If you guys have not heard about Anchor, you need to check it out. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. Number one, it's free. Number two, there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Josh and I do this. We're nowhere near each other. We do this stuff remotely, and we're able to do everything right from the Anchor app. Record it, edit it, add music, anything you can think of. And then the best part is Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Music, and many more platforms. You can make money from your podcast, which is really awesome, right? With no minimum listenership, which you really won't find anywhere else. It literally has everything you need to make a podcast in one place, right? So if you've ever thought about making a podcast, if you have a podcast, whatever, I highly recommend you check out Anchor. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. Peace.
We understand the importance of having the bondage between the parent and the child.
We're trying to get unemployment to go up, and I think we're going to succeed.
I feel right at home in this gymnasium. Chicken, I gotta be careful. Chicken, fecal, coliform bacteria.
I've now been in 57 states. I think one left to go.
I've signed legislation that will outlaw Russia forever. We begin bombing in 5 minutes.
I said on Friday, this thought took a while to thaw. It's going to take a while to unthaw. I remember meeting a mother of a child who was abducted by the North Koreans right here in the Oval Office.
I'll have another drink of that fine Irish whiskey.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
I oppose breaching those dams. I know the human being and fish can coexist peacefully.
Hello, and welcome to your new favorite podcast, which hopefully you've heard of at this point. I'm Chris.
And I'm Josh.
And you're now listening to the Humorous Mathematics Podcast. We want to thank you for tuning in. Today is May 8th, 2020. We've got an awesome guest on the show for you today, former CIA officer Brandon Blackburn, who was in the counterterrorist division. Really kind of has a very interesting story. So we're gonna ask him some questions. Some that pertain to his experience directly, and some that hopefully we can at least get his perspective, being a former officer in the Central Intelligence Agency and kind of being there, a little more boots on the ground and closer to the source, and being in DC for a while. So stay tuned. We've got that coming up. First, we're going to run through these headlines for you. We haven't been on here in over a week now, and so first and foremost, we want to apologize to you guys for not getting out any new content. We've been updating our studio, making sure we improve the sound quality, getting better software for the editing, making sure that we can provide you guys with the best quality show so you're not having to hear us scream in your ear every 10 minutes or so. So here we go. So in the headlines, Obama new details from wiretap Flynn phone calls surprising top DOJ officials. And if you haven't already heard, this whole General Flynn thing has really kind of come to a head. I really probably should have read these headlines in the other order. However, let me read you this excerpt real fast regarding this. So, outgoing President Barack Obama revealed in early 2017 that he knew details from phone calls incoming Trump administration National Security Advisor Michael Flynn made, surprising one of the DOJ's top officials, according to newly released documents. The department on Thursday moved to dismiss the criminal case against Flynn that rested on the phone calls. Sally Yates, the deputy attorney general at the time, recalled meeting with Obama at the White House on January 5th, 2017, along with a number of other officials, including then FBI Director James Comey. After dismissing everyone but Yates, Comey, and then the National Security Advisor Susan Rice, and then Vice President Joe Biden. I can't talk this morning. Joe Biden. Obama told them he had learned of the information about Flynn and the Lieutenant General's discussion with Russia Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. Kislyak's phone calls were being wiretapped by government officials, allowing them to hear what Flynn told him. So saying that obviously shares the other headline that I probably should have given you first, which was the DOJ dropped the Mike Flynn case, which I feel like in the truther community and the Patriot community, really in the true American community, those of us that are wanting to maintain and protect our liberty here in this country and our sovereignty, that's a bombshell. That's huge. The General Flynn case getting dropped means that there is an acceptance now of the wrongdoing. And it means that now calls for investigation. And of course, most of us know this investigation's been happening behind the scenes anyways. But now it sets the stage for the investigation and the findings of the investigation to be made public. It sets the stage for the public to be able to be in a position to demand justice. And as you heard in the other headline I just read, Obama knew of this stuff. And there's a lot of evidence in some of the newly declassified transcripts and footnotes and some of the FBI's handwritten notes that the White House was the one calling the shots, not just in the General Flynn stuff, but in all of the Spygate and the FISA abuse scandal in general. So really big, in my opinion, that this is now happened, right? And for those of you that follow the QAnon movement, this whole the FISA scandal, Spygate, all of this is really kind of been referred to as Act 1. This is the curtain being pulled out. So we'll see what happens from here. But I think we're probably in store for some interesting news over the next few weeks as this continues to develop and unfold. Goldman Sachs, bullish on U.S. economy, predicts 19% growth in Q3. That's pretty big. And if you've been watching the stock market, you can see the impact of that statement. All of these headlines will be leaking we'll post the links in the description of the episode here so you can find them and actually read more in detail. A lot of these are from the Epic Times. If you haven't read the Epic Times, I highly recommend it. One of, if not, definitely one of the best and most accurate news sources out there. So none of that mainstream media garbage that just aims to indoctrinate you with their politically incentivized and financially incentivized agendas and narratives. Another news, Elon Musk says coronavirus panic is dumb and stay-at-home orders are unconstitutional on the Joe Rogan podcast. Josh, you actually watched it. I have not. You want to share some insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I was just kind of surprised. I was surprised, to see that he was on there. As you know, Chris, I love that first interview. And that first interview they did, I guess, probably a year and a half ago or so, 2 years ago. So I stayed up late to watch it, and honestly, it was just a little. I was surprised that Elon seemed to, have similar thoughts that we do about coronavirus, and not to try to be insensitive or anything. I know a lot of people have strong feelings, strong fears about the virus. I'm not a scientist. I don't know everything, and I could be wrong. But he pretty much kind of had the same feeling that I did about the coronavirus being overblown, and I just thought it was interesting to finally see somebody who's that famous and that much in the public eye, you know what I mean, have the courage to just come out and just straight up say, yeah, you know, this whole thing seems overhyped. And furthermore that, you know, it's you know, making us stay locked in is a violation of our civil liberties. And I think a lot of people, you know, like if they disagree with me or Elon Musk about, that's totally fine. I get it. You know what I mean? Like maybe we're wrong, maybe you're right, and that's a possibility, right? But I almost feel like there's like too much of an opinion, collective opinion that our civil liberties don't matter. You know what I mean? Or that they're willing to sacrifice in order to get through this quote unquote pandemic. And I want to urge people to consider the slippery slope of infringement of your civil liberties. You know what I mean? Like you never know how many countries lost their civil liberties and never got them back. How many of them ever had them in the first place?
Yeah.
So it's just, you know, it was refreshing to see him say that, and I hope, you know, hopefully people kind of begin to realize, you know what I mean, that if there is a happy medium, like if there's action we can take to, you know, slow the spread of the virus while also returning to our lives as usual, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's what we need to go for instead of going one extreme or the other. But yeah,
we're losing you there. We're losing you a little bit, but yeah, no, I think it's crazy. And on that topic, honestly, I don't think in terms of you know, the reaction to the virus being overblown. I don't think there is a chance that you're wrong, simply because the data's out now. You know, it's not. This is no longer a theory. It's not a feeling. It's not a hunch that anybody has. The data's out. Whether they blatantly lied intentionally, or whether there were mistakes made, and they reacted based on fear and based on projections, you know, I guess is to be told. But honestly,
well, this is the frustrating thing, though. I mean, there's all kinds of data out. All right, so it's like it's either this is wrong or it's right. You know what I mean? Like there's usually not too much of an in between on this. I saw something the other day, and I do not remember what it's from.
Hey,
but
we're having some issues with your mic there.
Oh, okay, cool. My bad.
So let's go ahead and move on. We'll come back to this. We've got. I mean, if you want to finish what you're saying there, go ahead and finish that if you got your mic corrected.
Yeah, so I mean, no, just I saw. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, it's a little better, I think.
So yeah, just mainly just I saw I saw data out there that suggested that I think it was like within a couple of months, Dallas, Texas alone was going to experience like 3,000 deaths a day.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, so that's what I mean. You know, you've got all kinds of data out there. You know, regardless of whether it's real or it's not. And I mean, again, I'm not a medical professional, but I don't see 3,000 deaths a day. I don't see that happening.
I think that's exactly what I'm saying too. Is that those were projections. The projections were clearly overblown because the actual data, the evidence of what we're dealing with based on actual, you know, results, right? Data from testing results, data from antibody testings. That data has come in. And it's blatantly obvious that there is a massive disparity between the projections that they fed us and what the reality of the situation was. I mean, according to basically every university that's even looked at this stuff in the past month, you know, we're looking at less than 0.1% in terms of a mortality rate. I think the common cold kills more people. not even the flu. So, I mean, you know what I mean? We're not really, we're definitely seeing from what would be at least the most, the closest thing we could call it a factual basis, is just not lining up with what they fed us all along, and what they're still using as their reason for trying to restrict us and take our liberties. So, but I agree. I think it's very important, and I think that as American citizens, to all of our listeners, if you're not okay with this, if you don't like spending your life locked down like this, if you want to have the right to speak up against the government, if you want to have the right to assemble and to protest whenever the elected officials that we put in office are not doing what we think they should be doing and making the decisions that we believe are best for this nation, if you want to be able to have a say in that the way our founding fathers designed our Constitution and our nation for us to have, we have to do something about it now. There is no other time. The time is now. And, doing something doesn't mean go strap your guns on your back and go attack the White House. It doesn't mean that. It by no means does it mean that. What it does mean, though, is investigating, doing research, and speaking up. Doing, Shelley Luther, the Dallas woman that opened her salon and faced jail time, got arrested, and then was ordered released yesterday by the Texas Attorney General, and the governor chimed in, Governor Abbott, and they released her. They chimed in 2 days ago. She was released yesterday. And the sad thing with that whole situation is she wasn't jailed for opening her salon. I mean, let's be very realistic, guys. These aren't laws. None of these things that they're enforcing on us in regards to the coronavirus pandemic are laws. Laws have to be passed into government. None of these things are laws. They are dictates coming from the democratic dictatorship that has, really kind of planted its roots all over this nation's government, and it's, I say democratic only because that's where the majority of it seems to lie. However, do not by any stretch of the imagination believe that means that just because someone aligns themselves with more of a conservative view, that they are, just absolved of any potential guilt and all of this stuff. But, none of this stuff, none of it's laws. These are mandates, they're dictates, they're not laws. Therefore, you can't commit a crime. Shelley Luther was jailed for refusing to apologize to the judge. That's why she was jailed. And if you haven't heard that whole thing, you should. I'll see if we can find it and put it in the description. But let's keep going here. So this is an interesting one for me. Experts rush to exterminate Asian murder hornets discovered in U.S. for the first time to save honeybees. I'll be honest, I have not looked at this whole murder hornet thing as much as I think I probably should have. Everyone's been talking about this. What the hell are these things? I don't know. Where did this come? They're coming from Asia. They were like, oh, COVID didn't work. They're not freaked out enough. Keep them inside. They're all going to go outside. Send in the murder hornets. What are these things? Have you seen pictures of them? They're massive.
You know what? I mean, I've seen memes and heard about it, but I really haven't paid too much attention to this one. But yeah, I mean, it's being talked about, so it's very strange.
It's insane how big these things are, man. And I mean, yeah, I'm perplexed to say the least, man. There's a lot of weird shit going on. I mean, what is this? The plague? Is this the plague of locusts? But now they're murder hornets? I don't know, man. I don't know what it is. Q said this would be biblical. And speaking of Q, highly decorated retired military veteran, Army veteran, Major General Paul E. Vallely confirms the existence of Q on the Amerinuck podcast. We'll play a clip for you.
Room on the Americanuck Radio fan page. Do you know who the individual calling himself or themselves, if it's an organizational effort, Q. What do you know about that? Was that part of the PSYOP? What are you at liberty to say? Or is it a bunch of bunk?
Well, let me just tell you the QAnon's tied to information. And it comes out of a group called the Army of Northern Virginia. Okay?
Yep.
Now, this is a group of military intelligence specialists of over 800 people that advise the president.
And so
the president doesn't have a lot of confidence in the CIA or even the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, as much anymore. So he relies on these real operators. Most of them are special operations type of people.
Yeah.
And so this is where Q picks up and gets some of their information, as I understand it. I know what they're looking at now, these alternate technologies of actually creating a separate internet. Okay?
Yep.
And this internet can't be compromised. It's so high tech. Of course, that's up to conjecture. But there's some technologies in clouding and all of this stuff that they're working on, and the Chinese have been working on it as well. But they're really looking alternatives to communicate worldwide with an alternative, or I'd say an alternative to our internet as we know it today. That's all I can tell you about that.
Fair enough, General. You've told me a lot in just what you said there. I appreciate that.
So, and also, I actually just wrote an article on this that you can find in the description here. It's on our website. That kind of goes through all of this as well and gives a little bit of background on Major General Paulie Vallely. So I won't say too much because I want you to go there and check that out, of course. But it's hard to discredit the guy. I mean, this guy was a highly decorated Major General from the Army. He was in command in the Pacific. He was a military analyst for Fox News. I mean, this guy's. He's not some run-of-the-mill schmuck. He's the real deal in terms of American military, and he didn't give out too much information, as you just heard, but he definitely. How should I put this? I mean, it definitely gets you thinking. You know what I mean? We've all kind of waited and we've all kind of watched this movement and wondered what's really going on here. Is it real? Is it real? And I mean, this is a highly decorated, military official that's coming out and saying this. If we entrusted this guy, I mean, this guy was trusted by the White House during the Reagan era, and other administrations. He developed programs for the State Department and the Department of Defense. Like this is a guy that's been taken very serious within the U.S. government for, 60 years at this point. 32-year retired veteran. This guy is, he's the real deal. So it makes it has to have some level of credibility. But I mean, he basically claims that these guys are a part of the I think it was the Army of Northern Virginia. There's 800 plus and these military specialists that are basically advising President Trump. So interesting stuff. If you've looked at
this to me, this is the craziest headline to me. Like if you ask me, like I totally didn't expect a military officer to not only address the Q topic, let alone like come out and say, oh no, yeah, he's real. And so are about 800 other retired former intelligence elements that are.
No, they're not. He didn't say they were retired.
Oh shit. Okay. Oh my bad. Okay. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. He's saying there's 800 within the military intelligence community, 800 plus that have been advising President Trump because he doesn't trust. He hasn't trusted the standard, existing intelligence agencies within the government, the CIA, the FBI, the alphabet boys. So yeah, wow. It's crazy, man. It's crazy. And to our listeners, you know, if you've looked at this anymore, if you have any information, you have any thoughts on it, please share it with us. We absolutely want to hear it. You can email us, you can message us on Twitter. There's all the links are in the description here. Also, you can send us a voice message on Anchor. So if you get the Anchor app, you can send us a voice message there. But reach out, let us know, share the info with us. So another thing I wanted to announce before we do this final headline. Actually, let's do the final headline first. I'll give you this, then I'll give you the announcement. Trump administration rejects CDC guidelines on reopening U.S. amid coronavirus. Good. They've lost their credibility. Nothing that they have done has been good during this entire process. They pushed tests out that were contaminated with the virus. They've given out faulty numbers, faulty advice, faulty guidelines. Good, President Trump. Thank you for disregarding what they had to say. We do not need them or the World Health Organization or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or the Clinton Foundation telling us how we should live our lives and what liberties and what rights we should be giving up freely in the name of public health. These are our God-given rights. They have no right to tell us what we have to do. Look, if you don't want to take the risk of getting sick, if you believe the virus is that big of a threat, stay home. If that's it. Yeah. You don't want to go out and shop at a business because you think it's too much of a risk, shop online. But giving up our civil liberties and our rights and our freedoms is a mistake. It's a mistake that we will all pay dearly for the remainder of our lives and our children's lives unless we do something about it.
Yeah, your civil liberties are not something to be just wantonly, you know what I mean, surrendered or forfeited. That should, like, if it is I honestly want to say it's never necessary. Okay, it should never be necessary. I don't think that this virus has not been proven to be dangerous enough to warrant abandoning our civil liberties. In my humble opinion, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, but you look at the numbers, you look at the hard data, and also too, you kind of get the sense, just sort of observing where people are now compared to where they were 2 months ago when we started this lockdown. And I think people are starting to wake up, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I do too. And I think that it's, I'm sick of it. That's the truth. I'm sick of it, man. I'm sick of it. Let's move on. So in other news, we now have a new contributor to HMM News and to the Humorous Mathematics website. And her first article will go out either later today or tomorrow. Her name is Rory Stannard, and we are very excited to have her on the team. So I wanted to give her a shout out here and let you guys know to be on the lookout. She's a journalist that graduated from I can't remember when or where she graduated, to be honest, but we'll put that out in a bio on her. But she's very passionate about all of this as well, and so we're very excited to have her on the team. She's got a lot of good information. She's been researching and really studying the whole Pizzagate scandal, if you will, for the last couple of years, among many other things. So we're very excited to have her on the team. So Rory, if you're listening, welcome to the team. All right, so that's it for the headlines. We have honestly got a very good show for you today. We're really excited to jump on with Mr. Brandon Blackburn. the former intelligence officer from the Central Intelligence Agency, and really kind of dig into some of these things. We're going to ask some questions about the deep underground military bases, the child trafficking and human trafficking issue, epidemic, pandemic, really. That's the real pandemic. Well, we're talking about pandemics, but Benghazi, the FISA abuse, Spygate, General Flynn scandal, UFOs, right? So we're gonna ask some good questions. So we're excited. Stay tuned. We're gonna go to a quick break. When we come back, we will have Mr. Brandon Blackburn on with us, and we will get into the show. Hey guys, it's Chris and Josh, and we wanted to thank you for listening to the Humorous Mathematics Podcast. We invite you to join us in the fight to expose child trafficking by supporting the channel on Patreon at patreon.com/humorousmath17. That's humorousmath17, or by clicking the link in the description. Your support will help give us the resources to raise awareness and invite guests who are committed to getting the truth out there onto the show. Times are hard right now, but it doesn't take much to get involved and make a difference. As little as $10, $5, or even $3 goes a long way towards assisting us in providing the quality needed to get increased awareness on this issue and ensure our voices are always heard. If you can't support with a donation, don't worry. You can still help us expose these crimes against humanity by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing our podcast channel with your friends and family. Whether you can help or not, we promise that we will not give up on this fight until our children are safe. And we're back. And today we've got a very special guest with us. We're very excited to have him on the show. A lot of questions we're excited about asking. I think all of our listeners have been looking forward to this show as well. So, without further ado, we've got Brandon Blackburn, who is a former CIA officer. Can't speak to, exactly what he did, but he's going to share that with us on the show. So, we're excited. So, Brandon, how you doing, man?
Hey guys, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me tonight. How y'all doing?
Fantastic, man.
How's great, man.
How's the weather out there?
This was actually a rare, beautiful, not humid Florida day. So I'm coming to you from Southern Command of the United States, and we're just bracing ourselves for summer amidst all the lockdown.
Right. What part of Florida are you in?
I'm in the central part of the state, so I'm a little separation from the crazy beachgoers who are overtaking the shores the last few months, as you've seen in the news. But and luckily we're also separated from the Disney craziness too.
Right. Are you initially from Florida?
Yeah, I was born and raised, and then with my career that I know we're going to talk about, kind of saw the world, spent some time in D.C., but a beautiful woman was back here waiting on me, so it was always home, and I came back.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
There's not a better reason than that. Yeah,
nope.
I know.
That's the best one for sure, man. Absolutely. So, it's funny. So I'm a pretty big Miami Dolphins fan. My dad's actually from Miami. I used to live in a few different places in Florida.
I apologize for your fandom of that woeful team over the years.
I know. Hey, but
I tell them every day, Brandon. Every day.
The future's looking bright.
Yeah, you keep telling yourself that. I think
Are you a Tampa fan?
I am actually through marriage. My wife's a bit and now obviously everybody's a Tampa fan. That's not a New England fan. So we're excited for what's to come too.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I was extremely jealous. There was some talk in the beginning that Tom may have came down to Miami. I was definitely hoping to see that, but I think they're gonna do really well down there. I mean, that's a really good team already. So, but all right, so let's get into the other stuff. Unfortunately, we're not a sports podcast. I kind of wish we were right now, but let's jump into some of this stuff, man. So, how long were you, in the CIA? What was your job title? I guess maybe how'd you get started? Just give us a little background. What did you do exactly?
Yeah, sure. So I got into it, and there was no there's no uniform way of getting into an organization like that. But I was actually in grad school, and I was definitely motivated by 9/11. You know, that took place during part of my college days, and I was actually looking at either the Secret Service or the FBI when one of my grad school professors introduced himself on the first day of class that he had been a case officer with the agency back during the Cold War era. And he became kind of a mentor and, you know, talked about the organization. And my story for applying is kind of what you would expect from watching in the movies. Back then you went on the website and it was a very nebulous application process. I think, you know, all of the descriptions of the jobs were pretty generic, and I filled out an application. You know, I identified 2 or 3 jobs I thought I might be suited for, and I'm not kidding. At least 4 months went by with nothing. I kind of had written them off and forgot about it. And then lo and behold, one day, one of the secretaries from the grad school program, the receptionist at the front office, emailed me saying, "Did you apply for a government job in the last 6 months? If so, 2 representatives want to meet with you on this day in this room at this time." And that's all the info I had. So that started a pretty crazy, just, you know, background process just to get in the door. And then I was with the organization just around 8 years. I'm actually, they don't like you to talk specific dates on certain things, but I started in the Directorate of Intelligence, which is, they're the analysts. So they're the guys that have to make sense of all the raw intelligence, as we call it, for, you know, the likes of the president and, you know, Congress, whomever else. And, you know, that's great work, and it's some of the most important work that's done in the intelligence community. But when I got my first overseas tour in Iraq, I really fell in love with the operations side, and luckily kind of was taken under an experienced officer's wing, and he got me to transition over to the NCS, the National Clandestine Service. So I spent the majority of my career with the Counterterrorism Center, predominantly focused on Middle East. At the time, we were, you know, the rise of ISIS was prevalent. And then toward the end, I did a little bit of time up in the Southeast Asia area, Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Wow, that's crazy, and it's very much kind of what you what you expect from all the movies, you know, how you expect that to kind of go. That's wild. It's interesting too because, you know, and Josh, I don't even know if I've ever told you this. That was a career path that I wanted. Man, way back 10, 15 years ago. After 9/11, I actually was getting ready to go into the military as well. My grandfather and everybody on my mother's side of the family, every male on that side of the family is ex-military. And I was basically told that if I went, I would be outcasted from the family. So I didn't go. I mean, I think at that time there's so much uncertainty, you know what I mean, that I think people were, especially those that are from the military, I guess, were, you know, didn't think I'd make it back or whatever. So, you know, for whatever reason, though, I ended up not going. And so that was something I was always very interested in. I had a guy that I had met at a restaurant, actually, who was an analyst, and kept in contact with him for a while, but, you know, never really pursued anything from it. But interesting, man. That's really cool. I'm sure that was a really exciting career, honestly, you know, being over there, being in the clandestine services, and just kind of really being at the, you know, the center of a lot of this conflict and all the stuff that goes on that most people don't even know about.
Yeah, it was an interesting time, and I've learned from others, very experienced guys who commit their whole, you know, life to the service and are career guys there that were there before me, that, you know, really the 9/11 era with the war on terror ushered in a new type of intelligence collection, a new world of espionage, which, you know, it's a stark contrast from what you read about and hear about during the Cold War era, you know, where it was very much done in the shadows, and you took years to develop an asset in different countries. That all went out the window with the war on terror, because it was such a sense of urgency that, you know, another attack was imminent.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So let me ask you this. This is a little more of a, I guess, a little more of a confrontational question, if you will. Or during your time in the CIA, were you ever privy to maybe any other officers or superiors who may have had allegiances or loyalty to, say, maybe an alliance other than, the people of our nation, such as, I'm sure you've heard the term, a deep state cabal, or anything more or less maybe sinister than that?
No, I honestly can't say that I did, and that's not to skirt the issue, but they, that part is pretty heavily vetted. I can tell you that there was an instance at the State Department toward the end that I heard about, where an individual was essentially leading a double life, and he was running a neo-Nazi ring out of his suburban Virginia home, and then going to work for the State Department every day. So there are people who fall through the cracks. I think that, the most egregious examples I can speak to from what I saw, were more people that clearly had a political agenda based on, a certain candidate or certain political party. And
Right.
they wanted to use their analysis to try and influence policy in a way that, was partisan, if you will. That was really the worst that I was exposed to, I could say.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure, if that stuff was going on, it wouldn't last very long if if it wasn't very heavily guarded. So, I figured the answer would be no to that. But no, that's interesting. That's very. Did that ever make the news? The guy, did you say who said it was DHS that was living the double life there?
He was State Department. Yeah, in fact, I think it was Vanity Fair did a whole expose on it, sometime in this calendar year, 2020.
Wow.
I heard rumblings that it was being, they were reaching out to all kinds of people that had worked or interacted with him at the time. I had not. I had just heard, the aftermath once they had confirmed it. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, and there are people that get in and they might lean a certain way politically when they get in, and then the experience kind of reshapes them or, gets them to kind of rethink ideologies. But luckily the people I worked with, were very committed to what we were doing and for the right reasons during the time I was there. And I think that's a really important thing for people who read about an organization like the CIA. There are really two CIAs, if you will. There are the public, leaders that are appointed, and most people don't realize this, but the average shelf life for the director position at the CIA is under 2 years, which is not really a lot of time to, shape an agenda or change the culture there. I mean, they play a lot of musical chairs at that position. But those are the people that you tend to see in the media. And then you really don't have an appreciation for the guys who do it. The guys who work there for 25 years, they'll work for all kinds of political leaders. They come and go. So they typically keep their noses down and just try and get the work done for the most part.
Right.
And I would also imagine like a lot of what you did as well is sort of like compartmentalized because you're so close to the ground. You know what I mean? That like the more, I guess, nefarious, possibilities of what may occur in some of the ranks, which I don't assume that is the case with the vast majority.
Yeah, absolutely. And compartmentalization is a very big part of that organization. I think that's another thing that there's not really a public appreciation for. A lot of, my friends, and I was undercover a large part of my career, so I just in the last couple of years was able, since I got out, to get approved to even say I worked in the building, which was quite a process in and of itself. And there are people that think just because I work there, I know everything about, every operation that ever happened. And that's not really the case. I mean, compartmentalization means the program you work on is really the program that,
you're exposed to is pretty limited to the confines of the four walls of whatever unit you're working with.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's probably incredibly important in order to, keep something like this turning and to get the job done on a large scale. So, this is, again, we talked about this prior to and in our messages on Twitter, but, of course, I think one of our biggest things is the whole child trafficking and human trafficking issue, and very specifically child trafficking. I think that, more than anything, truthfully, is what really inspired us to even start doing any of this, was knowing that this stuff was going on. I mean, I don't know. Do you have kids?
I do, yeah. And I actually, just to put it into context, I live not far from Orlando, which is one of the highest concentrations of child trafficking in the country. So it's a very big issue. And I still study, I still work on de-radicalizing, people who are brainwashed to fall under extremist control or, extreme ideologies. And we see a lot of the same elements that they use with an extremist group come into play with human trafficking. The way that these traffickers will ultimately manipulate and seek to control their victims. And conspiracy theories are a big part of that, to get somebody to follow you and work for you in that setting, ultimately, which is their goal. You have to be able to manipulate their thinking about their families, the way the world works, law enforcement, etc. So there definitely is a link for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and I know you have some involvement now, and you work with some groups. From your experience in the intelligence community, can you maybe share some insight into, if really more for the listeners at home, but I think it's got a different impact when it comes from you versus than when it comes from us, right? But maybe some insight into just how prevalent the problem of human and child trafficking is, and how big of an industry it is across the globe, and even more specifically here in the States.
Yeah, it really is. It is, I hate to marginalize it, I don't mean to, but it is big business for people, and that's unfortunate. I don't know the statistics, so I don't want to misquote that, but I know, having worked with some nonprofits, I work with a great nonprofit called Parents for Peace, and also my law enforcement friends, that the rise of trafficking efforts has exponentially grown in the last decade. And by the way, Parents for Peace, which I just mentioned, they just did a study that during this COVID-19, essentially, national shutdown, they've seen an incredible rise in efforts to essentially radicalize youth via social media, because they prey on the disillusioned to start, so they look for vulnerable people, they look for opportune moments and people that they know that, whether it's through narcotics or just your simple brainwashing and mind control, people they can get to follow them into this world, and obviously kidnapping is a big part of it, but there's another angle where it happens in all walks of our life. It's happening in rural parts. It's happening in suburbia, at affluent neighborhoods, and low income neighborhoods. I think that's a big misconception, is that it's only relegated to the Skid Row areas of town, and that's not the case at all.
Right.
It's any neighborhood in our country is susceptible to falling prey to this type of activity.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important too. Yeah, and I think that is the case. And I mean, and I think, and I've always said it's wild to me, because a lot of people, when you mention this, even if this is the only thing you ever mention, there's still a lot of people that almost shun it and say it's a conspiracy theory, when of course the data does exist, right? We know it's not we know it's happening. We know it's an industry. We know that it surpassed the arms trade. It's closing in on the drug trade is at least what I've read. But it's definitely a big business. It's definitely happening, and people I think everywhere. I know here in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas, it's very common knowledge that, there are a few things that you should always look for whenever you come out of Walmart, because we know that there have been instances where trafficking's becoming a bigger problem here. And so people are aware of this. Yep. They'll consume that news and they'll assimilate that into their daily life. But whenever you try to share with them that, hey, this is actually a very large problem affecting the entire globe, they seem to struggle to comprehend that and to process it.
Yeah, because everybody, it's one of those issues that everybody has an anecdotal story, typically from their local news or national news. But until you know somebody that it's happened to, until you know the mother who's in the Walmart and the second she drops her child's hand to take something off the clothing rack, her child's snatched up, that's when you get people's attention. And that, by the way, is a real example of how they do it. And there are a lot of patterns that law enforcement sees that'll be worked upon by the traffickers for a few months at a time, and then once law enforcement gets smart to it, they change their methods. I know recently a tactic that was being used in some areas, they would zip tie, especially on a rainy day, they'd walk up and zip tie the windshield wipers on cars. Yeah. And, and then a female driver goes, especially a female driver is who they're targeting, goes to take it off, and, in that time they're vulnerable. So there's all kinds of, simple ways, that methodologies that they're using to make this, like you said, such a prevalent growth industry, if you will, in terms of illicit activity. And by the way, our truckers are, really part of being vigilant. I don't know if you guys have seen on the YouTube channels, but there's a whole network of semi-truckers who take it upon themselves to confront individuals who, with nefarious purposes, try and meet young teenage girls at these truck stops and so forth. So it's not just falling on law enforcement to be on the lookout for it, but that's a really common location for these traffickers to try and identify new victims, if you will.
It's truck stops. That makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Honestly,
how terrifying to think about, just how common it is. Like that the industry is so big that literally at any moment anybody could be snatched up or manipulated into getting into a situation that sort of entraps them into that industry. And I was, just sitting here talking to you, Brandon. I was curious, like, what kind of day-to-day things during wartime did you experience, like, over there? Like, what is it like over there in terms of when I say over there, I'm you were, if I'm not mistaken, in Afghanistan, correct?
Yeah, I was mostly in Iraq and on the Middle East mission. So, for example, our bases were confined, in areas like Baghdad and what's called the Green Zone. So that is a heavily fortified area where only the Western allies, if you will, are allowed to have their personnel. But we would have to go off base out of the Green Zone, each day. That the role of an intelligence officer when you're undercover is different than the military. So there's not really a lot of parallels, although we do a lot of liaising with them. But day-to-day life, your nerves get fried just not knowing what could happen next, even if you go, a couple weeks or months without something significant. I think that's it's one thing you're trained for your job and you're trained if a catastrophic event takes place, but there's not a lot to prepare you for the mental part of just always looking over your shoulder 24/7. And honestly, when you're in an undercover capacity, that holds true whether you're in a war zone or you're back here in the States, to be honest with you. I mean, DC is full of quote unquote diplomats from other country whose job is to try and identify, Americans that they can turn or they can manipulate for their own agenda. So, you kind of live in this very surreal state of paranoia that unless you've been through it, it's very hard to really explain to somebody.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. But I mean, it makes sense. It does. And I mean, it's, again, I think they've done a really good job of maybe desensitizing us to that in the first place through Hollywood. But I mean, it's what you see in the movies. It's what you read in the books. That's really what they do. I mean, Washington is kind of the I guess hot zone here for political activity and action. And you've got obviously intelligence communities from every really probably every nation, I would assume, but at least every nation that's organized to any degree, right? So it makes a lot of sense. If we're everywhere, it makes sense that we'd have everybody here in DC as well. So.
Oh yeah, and by the way, we're doing the same thing in some of these other countries too. So it's not like we're a passive participant by any means. So it's pretty it's pretty even playing field.
So give us some more insight into that if you can. Like, what do you think that we've sort of become almost imperialistic, like over imperialistic, I guess is probably the best word I can come up with. Like, can you sort of maybe, because a lot of people here don't know, including myself, maybe you can kind of paint a picture for us on what it looks like, from people around the world, from their perspective, like how they view us.
Well, I think that the what I would say is, if you read, let's take the Russian involvement in our last election, right? And that's by no means a right thing, and it's something that should be confronted. But everybody should ask themselves, if a country like Russia is doing it, the odds are a country like the United States is probably looking to do it, in other areas. So you can kind of read between the lines and say, yeah, getting involved through propaganda, social media tactics to push an agenda. It's a part of every, especially an intelligence community for each country. It's a part of their prerogative, not only to protect their interests, but to look for opportunities to improve upon their standing and their interest in these regions of the world.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's. Yeah.
So, you can be upset. You can be upset that Russia's doing it. That's all good and well, but I always laugh at some of these politicians that are incredulous that this actually took place, and it's because they know full well that there's many things that, yeah, exactly. It's part of the game. I hate to say it that way and to bring it down to that elementary of a level, but it's part of this global chess game that every superpower is involved in playing.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I read a book. I can't remember the guy that wrote it. Maybe you've heard of it. It was called, I think, Economic Hitman, or Diary of an Economic Hitman. And it was really about, a lot of that. And it was about how this guy, he worked for Bechtel. And, he kind of moved, I think he worked for Bechtel and maybe Maine. But he talked about Halliburton, Bechtel, Maine, how we would go in, the U.S. government would go into these countries like Brazil or, wherever else, some of these third world countries, and essentially, tell them, hey, look, we're going to help you here. You need to, promote stimulus in your economy. You need to rebuild your infrastructure. You need to do all of these things, and it's going to improve your country. However, it's going to cost you a lot of money. You don't have the money, but we have a deal for you. We'll loan you the money. There's a stipulation, of course. All of the construction, all of the work, all of the engineering has to be done by our companies. So, of course, then the U.S. government loans the money after looking at that nation's finances, basically, and seeing what they would be able to meet and wouldn't in terms of, payments. and then essentially setting them up in a trap where they're going to default, which is how we end up getting the land there, how we end up, placing bases there, or whatever the case is, taking the resources. It really, from his perspective at least, and whether this is true or not, I can't say, right? But basically, he talked about how, in many situations where we've, planes of presidents that opposed us and other nations happened to crash at, interesting timing or whatever the case is, right? And how we just essentially the imperialist nature of the big mighty nations still exist, and we're still absolutely spreading our tentacles throughout the globe. However, you can't be so overt and go take and move borders by force or by military power. You have to do it in a different fashion. It's almost more of a mental game and kind of playing the game a little different these days. So I don't know how much of that's true or not, but I can tell you it was a really good book. It had me locked in.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. That's an interesting job description, economic hitman. I like that.
Yeah, that was he. I guess he coined that term, but he talked about how a lot of these same people, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but a lot of these same people who sit in a lot of these presidential cabinets, they'll sit on the board of Halliburton for a few years, and then they'll go into a presidential cabinet, and when they come out, they'll go sit on the board of Bechtel or one of these other big firms, or in one of the big banking, whatever, right? And they just kind of rotate and play musical chairs a lot of times, and that's why you see those same names continuing to just always be in the spotlight and have influence and in some level of power. So a lot of interesting stuff with that, but it was definitely a good read and very interesting perspective in terms of some of the things that go on behind the scenes and how we're kind of, I guess, working with or against, in some cases, some of these other nations. But all right, so a little more controversial stuff. And I think we'll probably come back to some of the child trafficking stuff. But and this is honestly a big question that I know a lot of our listeners are very interested in, and it does, at least from a lot of the theories that we've heard, relate to the child trafficking. And I don't know if you're going to have any knowledge of this at all, or can even say any of it. Of course,
even an opinion would be great too. I mean, thoughts, any of that.
But deep underground military bases. Are you familiar with any of those? I mean, do you have any experience, any rumors from within the agency? Anything really in terms of these deep underground military bases, what they may be used for, are they currently being used for anything, whatever, right?
I mean, look, the extent that, I probably should say, I won't go too far into detail, but I think the best way to sum that up is if you think about, special ops and paramilitary units, and there are some intelligence organizations that have, paramilitary capabilities, they have to be able to act and operate in all kinds of terrain and conditions. And because of that, they have to have places to train that exist, throughout all kinds of conditions, whether it's, climate-wise or topography-wise, that those types of locales have to be part of their training resource toolkit, if you will. So, that's kind of a way of saying, throughout there are a lot more than just the official bases that you drive by and that are identified, but they're definitely a necessity to prepare for. For instance, like the raid that the anniversary we just celebrated, the raid that killed Bin Laden. We just celebrated that anniversary about a week ago. There was training that had to be done that for multiple reasons couldn't be done on a base that was associated with the military, and had to be done in a certain locale and climate to replicate what those SEALs were going to be confronting when they got on the ground in Pakistan.
Right. No, it makes sense. It does. Yeah, and I figured that's, I figured you wouldn't want to go too far into that one no matter what. Let me ask you.
And of course, Area
more.
51. I mean, that's got to be just a bunch of aliens, right?
That's the next question too. UFOs, man. I mean, of course, I don't think it's even a question anymore. I mean, I think everyone just saw the Pentagon's. Well, actually, I don't think everyone saw it. It seems like a lot of people missed it. But the Pentagon's recent D-class that showed those 3 videos, and I guess really for the most part acknowledged the existence of at least the unidentified crafts, right? But in no way does it allude to what may be piloting them. But
yeah, well, even before that, are you familiar with? I mean, they actually had DoD policy for how to, especially aviators, how to track and identify and report that phenomenon, right? There was an official program. It was called the Advanced Aircraft Threat Identification Program. I'm not sure. I might have mixed up some of those words, but that's the general gist of it. And it was official policy that shows you that it was prevalent enough that they had to, put something on paper to guide their personnel on how to report and document and so forth. So if that doesn't say, there's something else out there, I don't know what else will.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, even the fact that when they did finally disclose it, right, and they disclosed it, I guess, at the right time, right in the middle of all this COVID-19, Russia D-class, all of this crazy stuff, and then they dropped the disclosure, and it's almost like people are just like, okay, duh, yeah. We know. What else you got?
Well, they've been listening to your podcast, so they just said, "All right, we're caught. We might as well reveal
it." I hope not, man. I like sleeping at night. I hope they're not listening. But yeah, so that's funny though. Yeah, man. I mean, I think that's to not believe that. If there's something at this point is, I think that's the conspiracy. I think if you don't believe that there's some form of intelligence life, then you have to be a pretty big believer in conspiracies yourself, because you would have to basically assume that science is, faked from the top down, and that, nothing we know about space and the solar system and the galaxy could be true, because if you look at the evidence and what these scientists and astronomers say, the likelihood that we're alone is essentially non-existent. So
yeah, and it's incredibly myopic and arrogant to think this is all there is, right? I mean, it's just the grand design, regardless if you're a religious person or more science-based. There's just too much out there. And I think, there's some legitimate people that have come out that have, worked in certain positions at places like Area 51 that, seem to be reputable and have at least, put out there in the public domain. There's enough to suggest that there's more than just a training facility going on there.
Right.
What do you think about Lazar?
Lazar? I saw. Yeah, he's got the documentary on Netflix, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I've seen part of that. I mean, look, I think there's ammo for both sides with some of these, experts, right? Who was the guy? There was a Area 51 engineer, and it was like right before he died, it was almost like he had to get it off his chest. He died a few years ago.
Yeah. Yes.
I forget his name, but
yep. I know who you're talking about.
So, and he spoke to like, hey, we were doing some, experiments, and we were reverse engineering at least some type of craft that came from the sky, debris or pieces, whatever. So, those are the guy. I think we should be more open-minded as a society and our government to let these people talk. I never really saw the value in suppressing this information. There's definitely nothing. If the government, isn't careful, Elon Musk is just going to discover it all for us anyway.
On his own.
Yeah, on his own, and maybe that's what we need, is a guy powerful enough like him to just give the middle finger to the government. Put it out there. I'm not sure. But,
it could be. Yeah, that's interesting. So I don't know if are you familiar with Emery Smith? Is that who you were talking about?
I think you're talking about Boyd Bushman, right?
Bushman, yep. Bushman, yep. Yeah. Yeah, he died just a few years ago, if I remember.
Yes. Let's see. Yeah, I've got it right here. Lockheed Martin engineer provided evidence of alien life on his deathbed. He had
nothing. I mean, what was his agenda other than, right?
Yeah.
Right. Totally. There was no reason for him to disclose that. No monetary reason to spin any kind of story. The guy was about to die, so absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that just kind of, I think that, for him to do that on his deathbed, I think, one, he no longer had the fear of what they could do to him because he's obviously on his way out, anyways. I think that's, I think it's about as pure as it can get. I don't think you can question it too much. There's a lot, man. There's been a lot of people, a lot of credible people that have come forward, and a lot of times mysterious things happen to them. But I think at the end of the day, we won't know everything, and probably ever, but we won't know more until somebody like Elon Musk forces the issue and discovers it on his own, or we just get to a point where the government starts to lighten up on it for whatever reason, which we'll see what we'll see if that happens. But
I would put my money on Elon Musk getting there before the government, just the way that private industry works over the government.
Yeah, I think so too. I definitely do. Let me ask this, man. I got two kind of interconnected topics I want to chat about here that are very, I guess, prevalent right now. So I'm sure at this point you've heard of the phenomenon known as QAnon or Q.
Yep.
So any thoughts on that? I mean, I know, I don't know if you've seen, but Major General Paul E. Vallely just really kind of, he did an interview on another show and basically said, look, what I can tell you is that it's real. It's a group of about 800 roughly, intel community or military intel specialists that have been advising the president, from, I guess, really the beginning there of the presidency due to his lack of distrust with the existing intelligence agency or agencies, at least under their current leadership. Any thoughts or insight on that? Is it real? Is it a psyop? Do you know anything?
I don't know anything, and I've said before. So I left right before the new administration took effect. There was a little time in between, but I did not was not with the organization when the Trump administration took place. And I've often said curiosity would have led me to have liked to have worked, in the building for a few months at least. Because it's always, regardless of, the Trump administration brings with it an added, I think, intrigue, if you will, sometimes. But anytime administrations change hands, it's always interesting to see how that affects the work. Look, from what I know about, and granted, the culture and the mechanism and for how things get done and the processes, they're shifting pretty regularly. So my intel, if you will, on the intelligence community could be outdated even just a few years ago. But it would be so easy to identify just the methods of monitoring that take place, electronically within the building and the communications. I mean, it would have to be quite the the effort on behalf of this group to conceal any of their intentions. And that's not to say it can't be done, but I find it hard that it's taking place to that degree. But, crazier things have happened. I mean, what I do believe is that, there are people that are using their positions to maybe try and undermine, the president based on their analysis and try and push a new administration into effect with this coming election. I don't think that's by any means out of bounds in terms of, believing that to be true. But unfortunately, I don't have any smoking gun for you guys on the QAnon theory right now. But I know it'll make for a great movie one day. That's for sure.
What just real quickly? I mean, from the hip, would you lean reality in some way, or would you lean psyop? Be careful.
I always believe be careful. I never understood anybody in an intelligence position that was vocal about their political beliefs or really any beliefs about any of our, business leaders or political leaders. Maybe that's paranoia, but I just never thought it was smart to be in any of our facilities and talk or communicate in a way that suggests one or the other, because you never know. You really don't know who's listening when you're in that line of work. And I know it's not like I had any direct experience, but I just always had that in the back of my head. Of course, presidents and senators and business leaders in power, they can be vindictive and they can have their own agendas. So I don't think that's a smart play for anybody, regardless of who's running the show.
That's a valid and fascinating point. Up to this date so far, we've got over 3,500 Q drops, and it would just seem like to me that you drop that many times, so somebody's going to be looking at them and maybe be close enough to the situation to figure out who the hell it is that's dropping these things.
Right.
So
sure. And I think we're starting, I think one of the things, if I recall, that this conspiracy theory involves a lot of Hollywood involvement, right? With trafficking and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Absolutely.
So, I think we are in an era where a lot of Hollywood secrets are starting to come out. I will say that. And we definitely saw, it's not directly related, but it's kind of in the same vein. Even with, Harvey Weinstein, I mean, we saw the media try and suppress these stories, and, just the level of effort that was put into trying to bury these realities from coming to the public domain. So it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that these efforts are being made. I think, there are a lot of steps that have to fall into place perfectly for that theory, as I know it, to be completely, true. But I'm sure there's some nuggets of truth in there somewhere.
Yeah. I think that, like with most things, I think the truth is usually found somewhere within the balance of the two extremes. Sure. I don't know. We've looked at this, and there's a lot of things that have happened during this whole COVID thing that have led me to, personally think that, there's, it's hard for me to swallow that it would be, there's of course talk that the whole Q thing could be a psyop. I struggle to buy that one, right? Simply because it of course, it absolutely could be, and it could be there with the intent of maybe starting some dissent and creating a situation where we've got, a very divided and even more so divided nation that's ready for someone to just light the fuse for a civil war. I think there's a lot of possibilities, and I think that what you said is definitely our stance as well. You got to be careful no matter what. I mean, we like to at least hope it's not, but at the same time, you know, you never know. You never know if this is real, if it's not real. But the one thing you have to do and have to always continue to do is do your own research, you know, and continue to dig. And I think we've all seen at this point, you can't trust the media for almost anything. You know, I can't even count on both hands how many times each network individually has been caught lying in the past, 90 days. And I mean, pretty blatant lies. I don't know if you guys saw the I think it was, I don't remember. It was ABC or is one of the, might have been CBS, but one of the networks, they just got caught. They basically set up a fake testing line at one of the testing sites that they had, and basically everybody that was there came forward, and they said that they had the staff at the testing facility go get in their cars and get in line. And there were actually only two people getting tested that at that time, at least, that were basically forced to sit in that line and wait. Of course, we've seen other footage where people have caught on live stream. They've caught the media going and kind of staging those photos of the medical staffs, the doctors or nurses standing in the road with signs blocking the people who are trying to go to work or whatever the case is. And, I think
we've seen them use the same picture, the same footage of people on the beach. Right, one from Italy and then one from, I guess, probably Florida or California, if I'm remembering correctly. And then we've seen other cases where they would use hospital footage for a report on COVID-19, but it was the same footage, one in another country, one here in the United States. I don't know how common that is. I hope it's not common. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've definitely seen that. I mean, I think it's been common, right? But I don't think that's too. I think that it's become a conspiracy theory when it never should have been. I mean, I don't think it's ever been far-fetched that the media it could be influenced. Yeah, that the media could be influenced by those with a political agenda, or those with even outside of that, those with a commercial agenda, if you will, or a business agenda, right? I mean, it's we pay money for press releases, for media outlets to cover, our releases for our business to get to shift the public's perspective of us as a business. I mean, it's not that crazy to think that the thing that kind of runs everything in this country, money, could influence, the media. So we're going to go to a quick break. And when we come back, we've got, honestly, quite a bit of, questions to ask. We've got some good stuff. And one of them, which is the piece I think that I'm honestly most excited about talking about, truthfully, is asking you, Brandon, about some of the stuff with General Flynn, the FISA abuse and all of that. But we'll get into that as soon as we come back from the break.
Hey guys, it's Josh reminding you that this channel is for entertainment purposes only. We do not claim to be experts or to have all of the answers. We're just two regular guys with our own unique backgrounds that are dedicated to uncovering and exposing the truth about human trafficking, pedophilia, and abuses of power fueling crimes against humanity. Please take everything you hear on the show with a grain of salt, as we only aim to serve as a source of vetted information to raise questions that will lead you to do your own research and come to your own conclusions. We hope that you'll share those conclusions with us, along with any questions or topics you think we should cover, as this is a collective effort. Alone, we can only do so much, but together, we can possibly make a difference in uncovering the truth so that justice may be served to those deserving.
And we're back. So, yeah, man. So just straight into it, right? So, General Michael Flynn, of course, today the DOJ, announced that they were dropping the case. I know that yesterday There was the director of national intelligence, Grinnell, basically, said, "Hey, look, you've got to release this stuff, or else I will." In terms of the transcripts and everything else that was, from that investigation. So, but I think that, with the recent declassifications, I don't know if you've looked at them, but I mean, the picture's starting to get painted almost. Yeah, it's becoming very clear that, if you go and look at the footnotes and some of the transcripts and the investigation, not just in the Mike Flynn stuff, but in the FISA scandal. And I mean, there's no other way to put it. There's definitely a scandal within the FISA court situation. I mean, a lot of people are really kind of. Also, I think that over the last couple of months, I just saw this. We've had the lowest number of FISA warrants issued since the inception of the FISA courts, probably because we're getting all this information now. But how much have you looked at that? The whole Spygate, the collusion, the Steele dossier, all of that stuff. Have you really dug into any of that?
I haven't. There was a period when I just kind of wanted to not pay attention to any of that after you were so kind of immersed. And I spent, DC was my home base, even though I was overseas. And you kind of, when you get out of there, you want to, shower the filth off you, even though you're not, in politics necessarily, but just being around it. But what I can tell you is I think this is shaping up to be, a pretty disconcerting example of the politicization of, our organizations like the FBI and the intelligence community and Department of Justice. And that's what's really troubling. And that, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. These people that are in these positions of power that are, responsible for making the decisions about our national security and about, legal matters and so forth. Anytime when you start to let your political biases or ideologies come into play, every act that you've done has to be scrutinized. And I think that's what we're seeing with General Flynn, if I'm not mistaken. It looks like it was, politically motivated as much as anything, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I can't say that I'm surprised that it's being, brought to light that it went the way that it did. And I think, the ironic part is that whether it's, the current president or another president or another senator or the media, if you just really did things legit, you give most of these people this day and age enough rope, they're going to hang themselves. Why go and, do it underhandedly or illegally? I mean, this is kind of implementing illegal actions against the Department of Justice, right? At the time.
Yep.
That's what the indications are, right? So it's just, it's unfortunate. And honestly, when we talk about the media and politics, I think the citizenry bears a lot of the burden because we have given them all this power. We look to the media and politicians every time there's a crisis as the end all be all. And every time they come up short. So I don't know when society is going to learn that, there's the power to implement change and to improve upon our society is not in Washington, D.C. or, in newsrooms. It's within our own community. So that's kind of what I believe, based on my experience.
Well, and that's the way the framers, organized the Constitution anyway, was that the government is supposed to be accountable to us, not the other way around. And people have been, I think this COVID-19 situation unto itself has allowed a lot of people to realize, oh, wow, well, if if they have to stop shipping, or if shipping is slowed down, we're cut off from our supply line. And, even more than that, if China, for whatever reason, just decided to hold us off or to keep us from a large portion of our supply line, just to have the leverage, just to hold it over our head. You know, if they wanted to do that, they could, and we'd be in a shit ton of trouble. You know what I mean? If they did want to do that. So, I mean, yeah, hopefully the situation is waking people up and hopefully, you know, inspiring them to be more proactive when it comes to holding our leaders responsible, so that, you know, the situation doesn't get any worse. And I actually do, Brandon, if you don't mind, kind of maybe circle back around to overseas, your experience in the CIA. You know, I'm not even sure how to frame this question, honestly, but what are your thoughts on the possibility that the administration, the Obama administration at the time, might have possibly funded some elements that were close to ISIS and some of these other groups?
Look, I think the way that the United States has funded countries and, you know, foreign aid is what they call it, right? What it's identified under. The way that they do it is very irresponsible and haphazard. And it wasn't, in fairness, just under the Obama administration. I mean, it's just U.S. policy, and it's very hard to know, you know, where that money is going to be siphoned into. And we, as Americans, the general public has very little appreciation and understanding for what true corruption looks like. I mean, we have it in our own politics, but when you talk about places like the Middle East and North Africa and you know, parts of Asia, I mean, that is all, you know, they're all in South America. They're all run on corrupt, you know, practices and cultures that we would never allow take place in our own society as blatantly and as overtly as they do. Now, you know, obviously there are things, there are backroom deals and stuff that happen in our own country, but you know, we tend to look at other countries. We tend to mirror ourselves when we look at them, and you know, it's just not the case. I mean, you don't have democracies in the Middle East. You don't have you know, the types of systems that we have in terms of how things are governed. And until we recognize that and really reassess, you know, where the value is in supporting these countries, I think there's always going to be that threat and reality that this money falls into bad actors. You know, when you talk about the Middle East, by the way, you know, we have countries like Saudi Arabia, and they're always going to hedge their bets. They really want to see, you know, how the chess game ends up before they decide who to marry. They're going to go to the dance with, you know, anybody who asks them at times. And they're still unsure kind of how certain things are going to play out. So they're very strategic about it, which means there are going to be times that they fall in favor with us and they fall in favor with, you know, bad actors who probably, you know, support the likes of nefarious groups like the Taliban, like ISIS. You know, you have countries like Lebanon, where you actually have terrorist organizations with political influence. So, you know, until we really reassess and restructure that policy, I think it's unfortunately a sad reality of where we are in the world today.
So let me ask, like, basically what you're saying is that it's a possibility that maybe, you know, the administration was trying to do something good and sort of inadvertently wound up funding a terrorist group like ISIS. Or would you?
Sorry, you broke. Say that one more time. It kind of broke up.
My apologies.
No, you're good.
So you say it's sort of reasonable to think that it's a possibility that those funds or those efforts inadvertently supported a group like ISIS.
Well, yeah. I mean, listen. The reality is you cannot get intelligence against a group like ISIS unless you're going to deal with, you know, certain people who live and work in those circles. And that's where earlier when we talked, you know, I made the comparison of what intelligence is like today in this war on terror world, or post 9/11 world, if you will, versus what it was like in the Cold War. A guy like me and most of our intelligence officers, Americans, they can't penetrate an ISIS meeting, if you will, or an Al-Qaeda meeting. So we have to rely on people who can. Now, those people can because, by the way, they themselves have done nefarious things. They've done the stuff against America to build up their WASTA, their credibility. And those are the only people who can get in the room. So, they're gonna work for the highest bidder, and we can't get their intelligence without paying them. And so, you can kind of connect the dots that at times, it's kind of a foregone conclusion that we can't control, we can't monitor every transaction that takes place. And we have to do the best with the situation on the ground. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with trying to penetrate terrorist groups, it's a very, it's a reality that, is kind of sobering.
Yeah. No, it's, yeah. I mean, I also think that it's, look, we've got sometimes when you look at some of these groups, I mean, for instance, I mean, there is no secret to the fact that, the Bush administration, honestly put quite a bit of money behind and trained, in some instances, Al-Qaeda, at least somewhere during that administration, right? But I mean, of course, for different purposes during that time, right? I mean, sometimes we have conflict in these countries where you've got civil war type conflict, such as what we had going on in Syria, where every major nation has an interest in which way this goes. Like with Syria, of course, Russia and us, wherever Russia's interested, China and Iran are interested, and anywhere they're interested, we're of course interested. But there's I think there's times where those groups are fighting for a similar cause, if you will, in the sense that they're in that particular scenario, whatever it may be, their desires align with ours, even though they may be a little bit of a questionable organization overall. And so I don't think it's that crazy to think that, of course, we get money that's siphoned to them so that some of these groups go fight some of our battles. I think every country's doing that. And I don't know that that's ever going to stop. You know what I mean? I don't know that it will, but I think that, I think there's so much, man. I think that there's so much information that, and I've always said this, I think it's important information's classified. I think it's important that we don't see everything. And I know a lot of our listeners probably won't like me saying that. But I do think it's important that some things remain classified, at least, during the time that they're in operation and effective. But, I don't think that everybody can be responsible with information. And it's not that I mean any one person couldn't be responsible with information, but more so as a collective, when information's out there, it gets skewed. You know what I mean? And so it's just better sometimes that it's kept quiet. Problem is that leaves the opening for other things to be kept quiet that maybe shouldn't be kept quiet and we should know about. So I don't know,
Yeah, sure. And there's a difference between need to know and want to know, and
Right.
and do I want to know, the deal with the JFK assassination? If there's a conspiracy theory for you, I believe as well, acted alone. But yeah, I mean, if there was something different, do I necessarily need to know that? Probably not. And really, the work of an intelligence officer, it really is a mosaic, and you're building a puzzle, and it's irresponsible. It would be irresponsible for me to divulge certain pieces of information without understanding the domino effect that it can have on other operations in other parts of the world, because that's the reality of that line of work. So
Right.
That's why when rogue journalists and reporters take it upon themselves to reveal certain information that should still be classified, I think it's it's a very dangerous act on their part.
Right. You could expose, potentially undercover operatives. You could, honestly, there's a lot of stuff you could burn up an operation essentially that could get a ton of people killed or have a very negative impact in the future in terms of policy. I mean, I think that there's a thin line with it. You know what I mean? I mean, it's important that we have the information. I think that, we all want to know. But the question always is exactly that, what do we need to know? And at what cost do we need to know it? At what point is it, worth it for us to expose it at that time versus not, what I mean? What's the cost of it? So, speaking of JFK though, I'm glad you said that. It was actually one of my next ones. All right. So there's, in some communities right now, there is belief, at least, that George Bush Sr., who was the director of the CIA at that time, correct me if I'm wrong, but he of course there's some belief that maybe he actually orchestrated the assassination. I know, and actually from listening to you on the Valley Boys podcast, which to our listeners, if you haven't heard that, you should go check it out. It's on most major platforms. But you mentioned The Irishman, which I recently watched as well, and that really perked my ears up whenever I saw it. So, of course, to me, in The Irishman, what it seemed like it was alluding to was, the mafia had quite a bit of influence into politics at that time, into the world of politics. I mean, if Jimmy Hoffa was connected, and if that much influence, I mean, they hated Kennedy. They didn't like him. So, what are your thoughts? So, I mean, you said you think Oswald operated alone, but do you think Oswald was just a random guy who hated Kennedy, or do you think that maybe there was he was paid? I mean, I guess you answered that. Really, you think he did it on his own, but
but I think. But by the way, I think it was McCone who would have been director of the CIA during that time. Bush Sr. was later in the 80s. I was thinking through my list. Yeah, because Dulles, who was Dulles was the most longest tenured in the history. But now look, I think the question with Oswald, which would be interesting for a deep dive for somebody to do, is, was he a disciple of, anti-Kennedy propaganda that maybe was tied, to mob type of influences, I don't know. I mean, I think I love, you talked about The Irishman. I mean, you never want, when anybody's assassinated, especially a president, regardless of your politics, but I'm fascinated by the conspiracy theories behind it. And I kind of love the idea that The Irishman put out there, which is, that Hoffa made a phone call or two, right?
Yeah.
And, sorry if that's a spoiler for anybody who hasn't seen the movie or read the book, but I mean, I don't think that's necessarily a new idea, but I mean, it definitely does, it does bring some level of, belief that could have been what happened. But unfortunately, I don't think there's ever been a smoking gun, and I never heard of it in the halls of Langley that it existed and was, being held under lock and key, that it was a direct, order to Oswald that he was acting under. But, and that was also an era where it was a lot easier for stuff like that to happen without somebody, being in the know, right?
Right.
That's the other thing about this day and age with conspiracy theories. Most of the ones I read, there's just too many layers. All it takes is that one intern or that one, IT guy who set up the computer server to tweet to his friend or tell his buddy or something for it to be blown. But back then, man, when you didn't have social media and, cell phones and, people listening in like they have the capability of now, I think you could certainly get away with that type of stuff a lot easier.
Yeah. No, yeah, definitely. I mean, technology has very much changed the game. So, I mean, you got groups like Assange with WikiLeaks that use that to put a lot of that out there. And of course, like you said, I mean, literally, that's all it takes. One guy setting up the system who sees something he shouldn't. It's one text message. That text message today can be sent in private to someone he trusts, but within an hour can be all over the globe.
Yep.
So definitely a big difference now.
Do you mind? Can you hear me all right?
You're a little quiet.
Yeah. Okay. I actually do want to just really quick, if you don't mind, get your thoughts on the WikiLeaks emails, especially in regards to some of the pedophilia code words that were used in them. Brandon, do you think the emails were used
Sorry, I'm losing him right now.
Yeah, we can barely hear you, Josh.
Okay, go ahead and ask that, Chris.
That's better. Whatever you
just did is better now.
Okay, we can go back and edit this too, but so the wiki emails, I just wanted to get your thoughts on those. Also, some of the pedophilia language or code words used in them. Do you think those are legit? And if they are, and our politicians are involved in some nasty stuff like that, I mean, what do we do about it? What are your thoughts on that whole situation?
I wasn't. Is that something that came out of the week? I hadn't heard that. Was that a trend in the documents that were coming out? Or are you talking about like related to Epstein and all that?
The Clinton emails.
Huma Abedin. I know Weiner got busted with a laptop, or I think it was the FBI and New York police obtained that laptop and found some,
Yeah, Mike
really.
Flynn's, it was some pretty nasty stuff. Mike Flynn's lawyer, Sidney Powell, basically came out and said, "Look, there were 12 New York police officers that saw what was on that laptop. 9 of them are now dead." Which I don't think anyone can deny at this point. The what they call the Clinton body count is outrageous. I mean, everyone that's ever had any possibility of speaking out, whether they had anything to say or not, mysteriously died. Most of them by suicide. I mean, what's the number? I think it's 2,000 people. How does 2,000 people die of suicide? I don't think there's any one planet. I don't think there's any 100 people on the planet that collectively know 2,000 people that have committed suicide. How has nearly everyone that crossed our path committed suicide? It's crazy. But the WikiLeaks emails did put out there the whole Podesta and the conversation between Podesta and Hillary Clinton. And there was a lot of questionable stuff. I mean, the whole Pizzagate scandal, right? I mean, there's and I think for Pizzagate, look, whether they're running this stuff out of the basement at Comic Ping Pong, or whether Jimmy Elefantes is some ringleader who's tightly connected with these politicians, Podesta, the Clintons, the Obamas, whoever else, right? Whether that's really happening or not is almost irrelevant in the sense that there has been at least, at bare minimum, enough evidence supported or presented to support any level of investigation to be opened. Even if it was opened and shut, open in 5 days later shut, and they said nothing happened, we didn't find anything, it would make more sense. But the fact that all of this has come out and they've just continued to be like, that didn't happen, those aren't real they're real emails, but you don't know what you're talking. That doesn't mean anything. You know what I mean? Like, it's normal that she deleted that many emails. It's normal that it says that Barack Obama was going to spend $65,000 on hot dogs. It's normal that the emails were full of recognized and acknowledged symbolism and code words from the FBI themselves to represent, pedophilia and child love and all these other things. And yet there's never once been a local, state, or federal level investigation opened at all. There's never been anything. So, I mean, there's a lot that was, that has come out with that. And it's just been consistently swept under the rug. Nobody will cover it. Nobody will talk about it. And I don't know, but I
think that's what drives people crazy is when there is something there, it might not be, at the most extreme end, and we see that with media a lot too, the people who just deny that there's bias in the media, it's like, don't deny it, let's talk about it, admit there's something there, and then let's start, looking into it. So that's right. I hadn't followed as closely as you're talking about, but yeah, I mean, there's clearly something there. Not everything is especially stuff that's documented in email correspondence and so forth, right? It's the whole WikiLeaks thing to me has been really fascinating because depending on, who's in power, and depending on what's been released, and WikiLeaks has revealed things that are damaging to everybody on all sides of the political aisle, right? Yep. So sometimes Assange is seen as a hero, and then other times he's seen as a criminal who should be, tried for the maximum sentence, whatever that carries. So that whole thing is it just goes to show you, right, that there's probably some truth that he's pissing off that many people to some stuff. Now, like I said, I hadn't. You guys just gave me a little education or informed me on that tie-in, unfortunately, which is a pretty sad and disgusting one if that holds true. But we hope it's not. We hope it's not true. Right. But yeah, exactly. But at least there need to be people that say, look, on the surface there looks like, there's some things that need to be looked into. But yeah, when there's flat out denials, that's when I think you get more attention to a subject, right?
Right. Yeah, people are like, why won't you talk about this? There's got to be a reason. So, it's pretty crazy. I don't know how much longer. I mean, I think at this point we're at a point where so many people are asking this question now that they're going to have to acknowledge it. One side or the other is going to have to acknowledge it and say, hey, look, we're going to look at it at least, and we're going to at least see if anything's there. I think we're getting to a point where people are going to become very impatient and really not be willing to take no for an answer. And I mean, I think that all of this stuff that just took place and is taking place right now, I mean, there's clearly a lot of infringements on our liberties that are protected within the Constitution. I mean, right now they are enforcing dictates. These aren't laws. None of this stuff has been passed into a law. These are dictates, which is the dictatorship. You know what I mean? Like, this is what they're pushing on us. You need to stay in your house. You do all these things, and yeah, sure, okay, maybe it's in the name of public safety. However, the data's out. With the data's out now, you can't keep going down this path. You got to retract and walk back down the aisle, because we now know that the virus is not even a tenth of as deadly as you said it was. It's not as dangerous and as prevalent as you wanted us to believe. That's not the case. We've seen the data. So now it's time to walk back and say, how do we put the economy back together, and how do we get things back up and open? Not have mothers jailed for opening their salon. I mean, that's her right. That's that. Well, in my opinion.
At the very least, right? At the very least, right? I think there's enough data out there that suggests that rather than going from one extreme or the other, that there is a middle ground. There, you know what I mean? Definitely like just a modern day solution to, being mindful of the disease, you know what I mean? Implementing ways where we can prevent it, lower lower the possibility of people getting infected or from being killed, you know what I mean, without sacrificing civil liberties, and also without, just going out and acting like it doesn't exist. You know what I mean? At the very least.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and listen, there is a solution to be had that I think can account for, those who are susceptible or have fallen, victim or have died from it, and then the businesses and the economic turmoil. But the one thing, I don't think that those solutions will be coming out of Washington, D.C. So,
certainly,
certainly. I think that's the real, lesson learned from instances like this is there are people that are capable of figuring this out, and if we give them the time to do that, but those people don't run for political office, So.
Right. Hopefully Bill Gates is not one of them. I don't know if you've I don't know if you've done anything there.
No, I've seen his name in the headline, and and I think that's the other, thing that's happening in society, and social media is a big part of this, but we give, we look to people to step out of their lanes into something new because they were successful at one thing, and we automatically think they must really know something about other things,
Right.
And we give a lot of value to celebrities and what they think, when really at the end of the day, I don't want people telling me how to do things that, make millions of dollars a week doing. Bill Gates is not an example of this because he obviously is a smart man and is a businessman. But, the celebrity status we give these people that we become disciples of, I think is unfortunate.
Right.
No question.
Definitely agree with that, man. Definitely agree. All right, man. So, really last question here. We're kind of running out of time.
Sure.
Honestly, man, I'm really, really glad you came on the show. Really, really enjoyed having you on. Enjoyed this conversation. This has been enlightening. So it's really excited to be able to air this to our listeners. But one final question, at least for me and Josh, if you have a final question you want to ask after that, feel free. But this is actually one of your questions, Josh. But in terms of Benghazi, everything that happened there, do you have any thoughts on that? Any opinion with all of that, with all the the stuff that happened in Benghazi?
Yeah, it didn't. I don't think it shouldn't have happened that way. I think that was a prime example of what happens when we let decisions be made by politicians in Washington that have no experience on the ground in the real hot spots.
Right.
I can tell you what it was. The CIA apparatus overseas is one whereby there's a chief of station, and he's basically the decision maker for operations in country. And we know that he made requests before that day and the events took place that took those 4 lives that were declined. And that is, I won't say it's 100% unprecedented, but typically the chief of station, especially in an area like Libya, should get what he asked for, especially for security posturing. So it should not have gone that way. That one definitely hit close to home to the people who have been in places, who have been at our bases in the hot spots, because it could have, if it had happened anywhere else, it could have been any one of us. So there was no need for that. And it was politically minded people, both at the agency and, at the administration at the time, who just, let their agendas and their lack of experience in those situations, lead to the deaths of 4 Americans. So it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. Yeah, that whole situation was very upsetting. I mean, and also I'm sure you've seen it, but the movie 13 Hours, that was a very difficult thing to watch.
I've never watched it. Yeah,
I've
actually. Yeah, there are a couple of things I so far have not been interested in consuming. So that's one of them. But I have heard it was well done though for the story. But yeah.
Yeah, no, it and of course with my limited knowledge, right, and scope to base that on, but from what I saw and from what I've read, in terms of response from some of the guys that were there afterwards, it seems like they did a decent job of capturing that in the film. So, but it was definitely a tough pill to swallow. So, I've never really. I think that justice is going to we're going to have to look at it. You know what I mean? I just feel like we have to, again, another situation where we really have to put that under a microscope at some point and say, why were his requests denied? Why, if you know what I mean? Why did that happen? Why? What's the real reason? Because the reasons we've been given really just don't add up, and I don't think are sufficient. So,
Brandon, do you think that is that a situation where should the decision makers behind that situation should they be held accountable, or should they?
Yeah, I think they should, and I personally believe I tend to not get too political, but I believe in some way that Secretary Clinton was held accountable. She ultimately didn't. I think that did come into play in her not winning the election, in some circles. So, there's different ways of holding people accountable, but it's very unfortunate when we have the people that should be listening to, whether it's Americans here in the U.S. or our men and women overseas, they're really the ones in harm's way. They should be listened to in D.C. and not lectured to. And I think we're in an era where, D.C., and it's been a long era, tries to tell everyone they know best, and that's just not the case. So I wish there was more accountability on that. I had ties to one of the individuals in that event and that tragedy. But governments, I think one of the reasons politicians end up not being held accountable is because so many of them have, played in the mud that they know it's smart not to really hold each other's feet to the fire because it might come back around. So it's really unfortunate, and it's really, it leads to a lot of disillusionment with the rank and file because they feel like they don't have anybody back there who has their backs at times when stuff like that happens.
And to be quite frank, I mean, it kind of does circle back to the framing of the Constitution. It's as American free people, civilians, it's our responsibility to be aware of that kind of stuff and to be educated on those things that happen, and also demand changes collectively, you know what I mean, to administrations in the way that those things are handled, so that those kind of things don't happen. So it's literally, to be perfectly fair, it's on that those kind of things happening. It's our responsibility. You know what I mean? Like we're in part responsible for allowing leadership like that to get
absolutely.
out of hand.
Yep.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's an example too, like we were talking about, just one last thing on that, where if even one of our political leaders at the time who had a say in that allowed for that to happen and just come out and said, we screwed up and we're going to reassess our process. That's at least something, The problem was we got a lot of doubling down on the decisions that were made, which just, is not the right thing to do,
own up to the mistake and change course for the next time.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think that people have really lost sight of the fact that, we all know, I mean, you're taught in school that our founding fathers really kind of set us up, really created this nation and the Constitution and everything else in a way where we have checks and balances, right? And I think people have really kind of forgotten that we are those checks and balances.
That's right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
So I mean, it's I think that's important. And I think that's something that we've really got to get back to. And I think that's something that we're seeing. I think that's part of what this whole Patriot movement is us really trying to become those checks and balances again and push some of these things out into the forefront and ask some of the difficult questions and hold people accountable and force them to answer some of the, well, as much as you can force, right? Of course, we don't encourage, violence or committing crimes or any of this other stuff, but, just really pushing that out there and, trying to get some of these questions answered. So, but man, we really appreciate having you on. That's, really for right now. All the time we've got, I'm excited that we got to do this. I really enjoyed the talk. Hopefully you get to enjoy the rest of your, what are you doing now? Are you just retired? Are you?
No, I'm not, I don't have enough in the bank to retire, unfortunately, on the government salary, but, I did leave, it wasn't, I never really wanted to be a career government guy or, live in DC that long. So it was a chapter in my life, but, now I'm actually involved. I do a lot of, I do some consulting, like I told you about, with some of the nonprofits. And, I actually,
what were those nonprofits?
So Parents for Peace is one that's, a close friend of mine, is a big part of, and, on the periphery, we help out. He helps out very directly, but that's a great one, for anybody to check out what they're doing. They're all over social media. And then, there's some things that I'm involved with that, still apply to my old line of work, kind of on the private consulting side. But I'm also involved in, television. I do producing, working on some documentaries to, talk about some of the issues we're talking about here today. So, hopefully I can give you guys an update on when some of that stuff gets out and, we can further the education and bring awareness to some of these issues. So,
yeah, please do.
Absolutely.
And for our listeners at home, before we jump off here, how, I guess, in terms of Parents for Peace or anything else, how can they maybe get involved and support, or, do you know what the websites are? And of course we'll put them in the links in the description of the show as well. But
I think Parents for Peace. I think it's parentsforpeace.org. It might be p4p.org, but they're a great organization. It's parentsforpeace.org. So check them out. They're all over social media, and listen to each other is what I would say. Is educate anybody who's listening. Educate yourself on what's going on just in our own communities, whether it's trafficking or, trying to radicalize youth into extreme ideologies. It's all among us. It's nobody's immune to, no matter what your walk of life is. So.
Right. Absolutely.
Well said, my man. Well said.
Awesome. Well, Brandon, again, I appreciate you coming on, man. Really enjoyed the talk. Hope you can enjoy the remainder of your nice Floridian day and don't get beat up too much this summer by the sun. So,
all right.
Hey, thank you so much for coming on, man. It was awesome having you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I enjoyed the time. I appreciate you guys asking me on, and best of luck with this show. I hope you guys do great things with it.
Thanks, man. Thank you very much, man. All right, so that's it for today's show. again, we're so glad that we were able to do this today. Having somebody like Brandon Blackburn on the show was amazing. Very excited to be able to put this out to you guys. So, again, back to what we said at the beginning of the show, guys. Please take this as a call to action. And again, be careful with that. When we say call to action, we don't mean, violent protests or anything. That doesn't get anywhere. If you want to know how to participate and lead a civil rights movement, look at Dr. Martin Luther King. That's who you should study. That's the only way it's ever worked. Peace is the only way it works. These guys are not going to, because the problem is with these violent protests and these aggressive protests where you've got these foul signs and all these things, the news media is going to snag one photo of that and they're going to blast it, and all of the people who listen to the gospel preached by the mainstream media, they're going to think you're a bunch of Looney Tunes. You're crazy. You're just a country redneck who has a Confederate flag flying that is racist and whatever else they want to paint you as, because you're giving them that ammo, right? There is a very specific way this has to be done, and we have to do something about this. So the protest, look, they're trying to take away your right to assemble. They've done so in New York. In New York, you cannot protest. You have to basically apply for a permit to protest. How crazy is that? That's not America. That's not America. And it's time for us to do something. It's time to make sure that the rest of the world and the rest of this country is hearing it and knowing that, look, this is a problem. You are being fed a lot of junk. You're being fed a lot of bad information right now. And we don't know what's what. We don't know what's real and what isn't. That's the problem. And we're not here to tell you that we're the experts and we know. We're just here to tell you that we know that there's a problem and we know that somebody's lying. We're getting multiple sides to the same story every single time there's a new story out. Somebody's lying. Where's it at? Who's telling the lie? We need to find out, America. We need to figure this out. If we want to preserve our nation, if you want your children to grow up in the same world or a better world than what you grew up in, the time is now to do something about this. How can you do something? Write your state officials, blow their phones up, and ask questions and encourage them, damn near demand that these infringements of our civil liberties be removed, that they step back. There is a big difference in preserving public health and just absolutely encroaching on our human rights. These aren't even just our civil liberties as American citizens. They're our God-given rights as humans. So don't let people like Shelley Luther stand up and whether she spent 2 days in jail or not, there was no legal founding to lock her up. Don't let people like her stand alone. This is the time to do something. This is the time to stand up and to make an impact and to spread the word and do it the right way. Absolutely have to do it the right way. So that's it, guys. We're gonna close out. Really appreciate you tuning in. Seriously, make sure that you follow us on Twitter. Make sure you check out our YouTube. We're getting ready to start posting a lot of content on there. Humorous Mathematicians. Check out our website. We're posting more and more news stories. We're really just kind of cranking all this stuff up for you guys. So if you like the content, you like what we're doing, and if you want to help shape this, if you have ideas as to topics and things you think we should cover, if there are things we're not doing that you'd like us to do, tell us. We want to know. Our goal right now is, this just started off as a podcast. We decided, hey, Josh and I spend an hour or two on the phone every single day annoying my girlfriend talking about this stuff. We might as well record it and and make it available for other people to listen to, right? But now we're realizing, look, we've got to do something, just like we tell everybody else, it's time to do something. Well, this is us doing something. And our goal is to create an alternative news source that's for the people, by the people, right? I mean, we're just regular Joes like you. We're not we're not specialists in any of this stuff. We're not media experts. We're not political experts. We're people. We're just two regular guys that have different backgrounds, that have researched and investigated this stuff for a decade, and have reached a tipping point where we've I think heard and assimilated a call to action within our life and began to take some action. So tell us what you think. Share your thoughts. We want this to be something that is resourceful for you. Another thing, speaking of resourceful, before we jump off, our website is live. We are building our members area. Go join. The only thing you have to do is share your email with us. Don't worry, we're not going to blow you up. You may get an email here and there, but you can always unsubscribe from those if you'd like. But we're not going to blow you up. We're not going to try and sell you a bunch of stuff. But when you do that, you have access to the members only area of the site, which includes our resource vault. And right now we are compiling everything we can find from all of our research and the research of others online into one centralized place for you. Give you an example: all the WikiLeaks drops, all of the Q drops, all of the information and research that we can find, documents, videos supporting the Pizzagate stuff, the Mike Flynn deal, the Spygate, FISAgate, all of that. We're working to compile all of that in one place for you. Another big reason to do it. When you do, you will also, and this isn't live yet, but it will be very soon. You will also be able to submit requests to the government directly from our website to request information under the Freedom of Information Act. That'll be live here in about the next 30 days. So our members will be able to request information under the Freedom of Information Act directly, and they'll be able to, access this resource vault. So that's it, guys. We're done for the day. Appreciate you tuning in. Make sure to share this with your friends and tune in. We'll be posting another episode in the next couple days.